Here I am to talk about the remainder of our Tunnels and Trolls game from last year. Now, the one I'm talking about is the one with several players in their early teens and the father of two of them that I talked about in the Sick the Fairy on You post. So this is a similar video telling you about that and what we came to and what I did and all that. So we had a whole new adventure to do. And most of the characters, I think, at that point were second level, with the exception of the replacement character for the sadly fallen comrade, who turned out the replacement to be another fairy. So now we have two fairies. As long as I'm talking about that, the fairy played by Neo was extremely agile and lucky and very oriented. Well, they all are, but this one really, that particular fairy really played it stealthy and surprising. Whereas our new fairy, through the course of the adventures that I'm talking about here, was shown to be rather a brute and, dove into combat with the rest of them and sort of trusting to the added dice to, and good tactics to keep them as safe as possible, but still in there ready to take the hit if they had to, and surviving enough to become, notable as sort of the bloodstained fairy. So anyway, what did I begin with? You can see in the first attached document that I've really just found, a map by Dice and Logos on my hard drive and said, I love it. Let's do that. It's a weird tower with a shattered middle with all sorts of arcane, elaborate stuff, especially the top part above the broken point is real surrealistic, and then the bottom part is real solid, kind of dungeony tower. So I took a look at that and said, oh, I like that. And then I thought, well, what about a community nearby? So let's say a tower in a town. And I also kind of liked this too, because so far we had very much done a kind of a tactical assault on a mountain dungeon. And although I had kind of grounded it in the idea of a community, and we sort of elaborately made a little more metaphysics as we went along, I kind of liked the idea of a somewhat broader context with still a certain amount of, levels and stairs and stuff too. All right. Here we are. You can see that the initial page is completely sketchy. It's just basically, there's nothing under the village, the scary village, and then the crazy tower, and then just I divided into technical Tunnels and Trolls levels. So the village and the region just outside the tower and the first little section inside the tower I designated as level 1. And then the tower, basically works its way up in level. So I've got some notes on there. So I printed that out and then I wrote notes on it, and notes on the back. You may wonder who that is. At the top it says, thanks, Greg. And that's because I'm talking to Greg Stafford. Because, scratching my head about, villages and stuff like that, I said, well, let's go and wander through some Pendragon materials and look at their kooky little villages, each one with kind of a very fairy tale-ish problem. This one, there's a haunted hound, and then this one, there's, villagers who feed you fairy food and stuff. And actually, that was the one that interested me. So I sort of looked at that and spun off into my own mind about that, from just that little nugget of the food. And I said, okay, well, we've got monsters from the tower from higher up in the tower who are basically possessing or messing with the town, and I thought about villagers there feeding, visitors food that subverts them in some way. And I thought a little bit about that, the region around the tower, and the fact that that first section of it, the lower section of it, is kind of this buttressed, fortressy kind of thing, and said, all right, it's coming together. So then you can see that I've got this scribbled out diagram of basically a band of goons who are mystically replaced. I mean, if you go and you try to defend the villagers from them, and they're taking all the villagers, goods and money, and basically driving the village into the ground. But if you go and you try to combat them and you kill one of them, then you become one of them. So I thought, okay, well, this is kind of fun. I could do that. I think some aspects of that you can probably see if you dig through your Pendragon stuff and say, oh, look, Ron, took this and that from here and there. But it was coming together, and especially because I'm looking at the map, and I was fortunate to find two disconnected maps for the village, which look like they were made for each other. Of course, they weren't, but you put them next to each other and like, oh, that's fantastic. So I've got this naturalistic drawing of the village and this little map, and it's so all right. So that's the village, and that kind of set me up. Started thinking about, okay, there's the village and there's the tower over there. And then I was looking at the tower and that break in it and the really distinctive difference between the below and above the break. And I said, all right, let's get weird. All right, we're going to have this whole area, with these distinctive pink clouds, cloud cover. It's sort of a notable area in the sense that other people think of it as a little bit fantastic. A little spooky maybe, and the cloud cover is such that it's thickest around the tower and you can't see the top. So the only part of the tower that anybody sees is just that lower half, which led me to, doing a little bit of visuals for the players. So I blew up the lower half of the tower, and then of course those village maps. And that's what I brought and said, okay, where you can see when you go and look, at the tower from the village, it's visible, but far away. And you can kind of see that it looks like this. And I mentioned that at the top of it, the very top is obscured a bit, by the lowest and thickest part of this distinctive cloud phenomenon in the area. And that's pretty cool. So they had a nice sense of, where we were and what it looked like. And coming to play, then you can come and see when you look in the document, you can see my basic setup that I brought at first to play. And you can also see notes on it that I made either during play or just before or just after, kind of after. It may not be immediately evident which of those there are. And I'm not going to go in and, color code it for you or anything. That's sort of characteristic of materials that I use for play. I type something and print it, and then I write all over it, and then I go and use that for play. And then during play, of course, you write on that very same thing. And then afterward, you're looking at all of that, and then you make some notes about what you're going to do for next time. And so, the document itself is not particularly useful for sequential archival reflection by someone else. But that's life. I mean, these are the instruments and that's how I play them. So anyway, you can look at that next page and you can see that I now have flying beings from the tower who will possess individual villagers, especially bakers and food people. And then I have the effects prepared for the session for eating the food, what it's like to deal with the other villagers who are all terrified. They've been through a couple of cycles of protectors coming to help them, and then those protectors getting turned into their oppressors. And I talk about how these goons will ride through the village occasionally and kind of glower around and make sure everything's going the way they want. Then I looked at the tower again and I realized there's actually three sections. There's that lowest section that's continuous with the region around it. So that's what, the goons use. And also I had like a lead one who's stayed the same the whole time. So he's like the badass. And then I had the area just above that, still under the clouds, which is all broken and busted up. And interestingly enough, very walled off doors wise and blocked area wise. You can see on the map that the fourth level, the one just under the broken point, has these clawed windows. But it seems like you could easily, or it is blocked off from the lower part. And I'm like, oh, okay, so that's a distinctive part too, and that's where the flying beings are. They go in and out the window, and for some reason they and the guardians don't really want to deal with each other. So goons / guardians. So okay, I got it. The goons are afraid of them. They're the ones who are sort of powering the whole situation. They're the ones doing the possession. They're the ones who've laid this sort of ongoing guardianship upon anybody violent who comes along. And therefore, okay, that makes sense, right? The goons are actually extracting all the wealth from the villagers and are giving it to these critters. And I got to thinking, well, they only want gold. Everything else the goons can have, but the goons, of course, are all addled and cursed and possessed and stuff. So they're like not taking care of themselves, and they're just all the crap treasures and stuff, or any other kind of treasures that they're taking from the villagers, are just getting kind of thrown around inside the levels of the tower where they stay. And it's kind of like this great big kind of dirty sock frat boy goon, jumble. And then up there are the scary winged creatures, and they get the gold, right? So you can even see like satchels of gold that have been set at the doors because the goons will, take them up when they get around to it. So, so I'm getting kind of an image there, and I'm also thinking about playing the villagers. Well, okay, so you can see all this on the sheet. It's sketchy as you go up because I'm mostly focusing on what it's like, down there where the player characters are about to play. And I have a pretty good mental idea of some of these things I just talked about, but you can see on the notes that a lot of the bullet points and stuff, there's a few specifications like where, satchels of money are, and there's all sorts of things, all my things of creatures they might encounter and fight, various saving rolls at different places, what happens if you kill one of these guys, what happens if you eat the food, and all sorts of stuff. So I was all prepared for this. We went in and played, and having added, we added another player. So that meant that now we had 5 players, and each one with 2 characters. One who's been playing for a couple of sessions, one who's new to it, and then 3 who've been in on this from the beginning. And it's a handful. I mean, that's a lot of Tunnels and Trolls characters, and that's a lot of different magic that could be flying around, and that's a lot of different scores, right, among strength and constitution and money and all sorts of things to sort of be kicking around at a table with people with varying degrees of expertise with it. I am happy to say that I recognized all this and went a little slow, and we had a good learning, right? A good learning process for everybody as they sort of settled into being able to play. For the people who were relatively new to role playing at all, they loved the idea of the village and, I had the maps and stuff. So I was able to say, okay, this is where the villagers are happy for you to camp, and here's where the brewer is, and there's going to be a big dinner tonight, and it's going to be over here in this courtyard. And people were quite active about where they wanted to go and stay. And this person, a few of the people said, oh yes, thank you, so nice to have you visitors, please, stay at my inn or stay in my barn and stuff like that. And so quickly we had a distribution of people, and had to make up a few NPCs on the fly here, but I knew which ones were collusive with the winged beings in the tower because, well, they'd been possessed, and which ones were terrified. And there was therefore one woman who was boarding the leprechaun character Cree and someone else, and they were trying to protect them. And interestingly enough, very coincidentally, a number of the player characters were taken in. They didn't notice that the villagers are acting funny and scared, or out of luck ended up, or unluck rather, end up eating, some of the enchanted food, and it was Walks, of whom you may recall, our doughty hobbit, of notably low intelligence, who actually makes this insane saving throw and totally is kind of adopted by one of these villagers, and yet fails to recognize anything that's going on. So he's totally unenchanted, totally protected by the villagers, and has no idea that anything strange is happening. So the activities of Walks through the course of all these other characters, travails or dangers and things, is pretty hilarious. I don't know, something about hobbits in Tunnels and Trolls. They just become these brutish little, chaos mongers. I just don't know how it happens. So anyways, through the course of events, we end up not clashing with the goons / guardians. We do end up, however, with one of the winged beings coming to the village to manage possession and stuff, ending up in a magical combat. And the way I set these things up is if you zap one, they break up into a whole bunch of little ones, right? So that combat got started at the end of our first session. We were kind of taking our time. I mean, they hadn't gone to the tower. They hadn't encountered, the goons directly. But it really grounded us all in this situation with different characters in different relation to all the different influences and possible sources of information or effects that the situation may have had on you. So we had a nice diversity of all those things, and people were really starting to get into, okay, this character of mine is under these, compulsions or in this situation, and this other character of mine, he knows this and doesn't know that, and so is going to go do this. So it was cool, and I think the table kind of caught, the gears kind of caught, and they started, enjoying, saying, well, given who knows what, who does what, is really going to set up the next, scene. So I'm liking all of this.